The evolution of midway games of the 1920s. These have been a staple to gamers for decades. Seeing a rise and fall into an eventual niche market, these games are always a treat for gamers young and old. This is the history of arcade cabinets.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's going to be a fun one.
Changing it up a little.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Welcome to Press Start to Join, episode 149. I'm Josh.
I'm Alan. Since the late 70s, people of all ages have been playing games at the arcade.
And today we're going through the history and technology behind these wonderful distractions.
Now get your stack of quarters ready and press start to join.
So, what is an arcade game, Alan?
A game you play in an arcade.
An arcade game, or coin-op, is a coin-operated entertainment machine typically installed in public businesses such as restaurants, bars, and amusement arcades. Most arcade games are video games, pinball machines, electromechanical games, redemption games, or merchandisers.
Okay.
Yeah. So, basically redemption games are like claw games.
Yeah, where it's just like you're trying to get a thing.
Yeah, and merchandisers is just play to get garbage.
Are merchandisers like those super stacker bullshit games that are like, win an iPod?
Yeah.
Okay,
Basically.
gotcha.
Sort of like a redemption game, just more, I don't know. It's all garbage.
It's more gambly and less like
Yeah.
any kind of skill.
Oh yeah, it's gross. So, before the arcade cabinets that we're most familiar with, there was electromechanical games. And as they are still found, they are less relevant than they once were. And it was in 1966 that Sega introduced an electromechanical game called Periscope. It was an early submarine simulator and a light gun shooter, which you used lights and plastic waves to simulate sinking ships from a submarine.
Neat.
It became an instant success in Japan, Europe, and North America, where it was the first arcade game to cost $0.25 to play, which would remain the standard price for arcade games basically forever.
Maybe.
Yeah, I guess $0.25 tokens.
It's gone up to loony in many an arcade.
That's gross.
Yeah, and mostly in Canada, I think. I think in the States it's still primarily quarters.
In 1967, Taito released an electromechanical arcade game called Crown Soccer Special, a two-player sports game that simulated football using various electronic components and basically little pinball flippers.
Cool.
Yeah. So this is like the framework for what we're used to with regular cabinets. So I thought it was interesting, and then I found a whole bunch of neat stuff about it.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Sega later produced gun games, which were like first-person shooter games, but they were electromechanical games that used rear projection, similar to like a Zoetrope, which early technology.
Is it like the thing spinning around a lamp to make it look like it's moving?
Yeah, pretty sure.
Gotcha.
Move to make animations, but you would shoot electromechanical objects with a light gun.
Okay, so it was kind of like analog animation where it moved something in front of a light quickly to make it look like it's moving.
Yeah. So the first one of these was a light gun game called Duck Hunt in 1969.
Oh, jeez.
Animated moving targets moved on the screen, and then it would print your score out on a ticket. Like, wow. That year, Sega released an electromechanical racing game called Grand Prix, which was a first-person view with electronic sound and a dashboard and with a racing wheel and accelerator.
Oh.
And then you drive on a rolling screen with a road projected on it.
Nice.
And then Sega released another game called Missile, a shooter and vehicle combat simulation, which had electronic sound, which was like high tech then.
Yeah, no kidding.
That it's noted because back then it was like electronic sound. A moving film strip represented targets on a projection screen. It was the earliest known arcade game to use a joystick and a fire button.
Oh.
So, yeah, thank Missile by Sega.
Cool. Sega was like really good at their shit. Like, I was just telling Joe about the Dreamcast VMUs, and it's like, damn, why didn't more things pick that up?
Yeah. So this game had, you would move your little joystick to move your tank. Mm-hmm. And then once you shot a missile, you would steer the missile. And when you would hit these planes, it would actually animate an explosion on the screen.
Nice.
And go...
Oh my god.
The next year, Midway Games released a game in North America called Sammy, which is basically Missile re-released in English.
Okay, fair enough.
Then Sega made Jet Rocket, a combat flight simulator, and the cockpit controls could move the player aircraft around the landscape displayed on a screen. Then you'd shoot missiles onto targets. So, like, if there was an arcade museum, I'd want to see these.
Mm-hmm, no kidding.
And then, so these things were, like, really, really popular, it seems.
Mm-hmm, no, well, yeah, I mean, they're a huge deal.
Yeah. But in the 70s, Pong was released, and that was the beginning of the end for electromechanical games.
Yeah, as soon as you could play it at home.
Yeah. The last few ones of note were in 1972. Sega released a game called Killer Shark, another electromechanical ones. And it actually appeared in Jaws in 1975.
Neat.
1974, Nintendo made a electromechanical game called Wild Gunman, where you would shoot at a full motion video projection screen from a 16mm film to shoot live action cowboys.
Wow.
Yeah, and now Sega's all no violence, right?
Yeah.
And one of the last successful ones was called F1. It was a racing game by Namco and then distributed by Atari.
Cool.
And this game made appearances in the films Dawn of the Dead, Midnight Madness.
Must have just been like an arcade movie.
Yeah. And then in 1978, Space Invaders came out, and that was basically the last nail in the coffin for electromechanical games.
Oh, yeah, and then it's all digital.
Yeah. So there was an era of these bigger machines that ran with more mechanical things than digital.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool. Like, you don't see stuff like that anymore, except for like the slide your coin in to hopefully win some money. I don't know. I don't like those gambling games.
Well, yeah, because all the mechanical stuff, it's harder to maintain and it's less flexible.
Oh yeah, way harder to maintain.
Yeah, there's moving parts like at all.
So we went a little bit ahead for arcade games. Like I said, 1971. Mm-hmm. Pong came out in 1972, but in 1971, students at Stanford University set up the Galaxy game, which was a coin-operated version of Space War, which was a game they released.
Oh, fancy.
So this is the earliest known coin-operated video game. And later that year, they created their first mass-manufactured game called Computer Space. So, Computer Space, you've just controlled a rocket as it attempts to try shoot a pair of flying saucers while you avoid their shots.
Oh, okay.
1972, Atari was formed. That's when the coin-operated video game industry blew up with Pong. There was many imitators, so Atari did not really dominate this whole market because everybody could make a Pong. It was simple.
Yeah.
Just everyone stole their stuff. That's where it all started. The mid-70s to the 80s, people consider that the golden age of arcade games.
Oh, fancy.
Space Invaders came out in 1978, and they call it the first blockbuster arcade game.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
And that's really what people think is the beginning of the golden age of arcade games. So now video game arcades started showing up in shopping malls. Little corner arcades appeared in restaurants, grocery stores, bars, movie theaters, all over the United States, Japan, and other countries between the 70s and 80s.
Japan's crazy for arcades.
Oh, yeah. So Space Invaders in 78, Galaxy in 79, Pac-Man 80, Battlezone 80. Yeah, so by 81, these games were basically encapsulating everyone's attention. And now the arcade video game industry was worth $8 billion in the 80s.
Jesus, that's a lot of money now.
Yes, as of 2016, that would be about $21 billion.
Jeez. Then again, I guess it was spread out around a lot of people, a lot of manufacturers. So,
oh yeah. So during this time, Chuck E. Cheese, Ground and Round, Dave & Buster's, Showbiz Pizza, and Gaddy's Pizza took the restaurant and the bar environment and arcades and made it a whole new genre of restaurant.
Nice.
In Canada, we only really get Chuck E. Cheese.
Which I've never been to, but apparently they're getting rid of the animatronic band.
Oh.
Yeah.
In the late 80s, arcade game craze sort of started to take a hit from advances in home consoles. Mm-hmm. And then by 91, the US arcade game revenues dropped to $2.1 billion.
Oh, only $2.1 billion with
From
a B.
8.
Oh no.
From 8. A ton of advances for this technology in the late 80s. Sega had this the AM2 hang-on, and it was it was this program that was like Sega's first superscaler for arcade games that allowed these system boards to do pseudo 3D sprite scaling at high frame rates.
Oh, cool.
Like Star Fox and stuff with the super chip on the SNES.
Oh, and the whole Mode 7 thing?
Yeah, like that's pseudo 3D.
Nice.
So the cool thing about this this Sega game, the AM2, this system had you riding a bike in a 3D world, and the controller was a bike.
Oh, crazy.
It's one of those. So those are really popular, having the more analog feel. Mm-hmm. So this began the Taycan trend, which is a motion-controlled hydraulic arcade cabinet, like many games in the late 80s had.
Oh, yeah.
And people really liked it because it's more tactile.
Well, yeah, like, do you want to drive a car with a joystick, or do you want to get into, like, a cockpit and start the steering wheel, get bumped around, shift?
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and the guy that designed it, Yu Suzuki, he said, designs were always 3D from the beginning. All the calculations in the system were 3D, even from hang-on, and I calculated the position, scale, and zoom rate of 3D, converted it backwards to 2D, so I was always thinking 3D. So, like, this guy was the right man for the job to make these 3D games.
Yeah, definitely ahead of the curve on that.
So after the decline in the late 80s, there was a small renaissance in the 90s. Because in 1991, Capcom's Street Fighter II really popularized competitive fighting games and revived arcades. And they haven't seen people flock to arcades since Pac-Man, and they called it the arcade game renaissance. Because of Street Fighter II, there was many other popular games that sort of jumped on this. Pit Fighter by Atari, I'm pretty sure that died.
Yeah, I haven't ever heard of it, so yeah. Probably.
We all know about Mortal Kombat by Midway Games. I actually already did the history of Mortal Kombat.
That was a good one.
Virtua Fighter by Sega, Killer Instinct by Rare, and The King of Fighters by SNK.
Cool.
So in 1993, Electronic Games, a publication, noted that when historians look back on the world of coin-op during the 1990s, one of the defining highlights of the video game art form will undoubtedly focus on fighting martial arts themes.
Definitely.
He described it as the backbone of the industry at the time.
Well, yeah, fighting games were always, I don't know, they felt more skill-based rather than just like memorization and repetition.
But the tough thing with arcade games is you're renting each life.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get good.
Well, and that was another thing. Fighting games had way more potential to ride out your quarter than a lot of things like racing games or even like House of the Dead and that kind of thing. Those are either token takers or like time-based, like you do X number of races.
Yeah.
Whereas fighters, it's like you just kind of keep going as long as you have opponents.
And the racing games usually have checkpoints that you have so many seconds to get to the next one.
Oh yeah, that's always a pain.
Yeah. So as I was saying earlier, the pseudo 3D graphics started, and now real 3D polygon graphics were becoming popularized by Sega Model 1 games, which are Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter.
Nice.
And then they got followed by the Namco System 22. To me, when I was writing, and to you, it's weird that these are being stated like this, but it's because these are boards.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like these are, the brains of each different machine.
Yeah, it's basically like the different computers that people have in their homes, like Acer, Asus, all that stuff.
But they were designed by each game developer that put a cabinet out.
Yeah, because there was no like manufacturer that you buy a generic board from. If you want to make a game, you make the board for that game. You make the memory for that game.
Oh yeah, this is the time for that. Yep. So that Namco System 22 had Ridge Racer on it. The Sega Model 2 had Daytona USA. I think I actually did play that. It's the car game.
Oh, cool.
And light gun shooters like Virtual Cop, Mesa Logic's Area 51, and these shooter games were gaining a lot of popularity in the 90s.
Oh yeah, light gun games are still the best ones in a lot of arcades.
I'm always tempted to rent out both guns, but I feel like a dick, even if I'm playing alone.
Well, it makes it that much harder, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, reloading each thing, but you have 2 lives, kinda?
Well, I think it does like scale the difficulty. A lot of the time, like stuff won't come at the other side of the screen unless there's a token in it.
So by 1994, arcade games in the US were generating revenues of $7 billion in quarters.
Yay, they got back up to their higher billion number now.
So the comparison is to the home console sales of only $6 billion.
Only.
And many of the best-selling games in the 90s were usually arcade ports. Because they were just making games that were more fun. So you would go spend money.
Yeah, and then you can get it in your home and not pay a quarter all the time. And it's like, yeah, sure, I will do that.
And kind of a fun fact is the total US arcade and console game revenues were $13 billion in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And that was almost 2.5 times bigger than the $5 billion in revenue grossed by movies in that same year.
Yeah, video games have always been where it's at with profit-wise.
Yeah, instead of, I guess, I was going to say $11 movie ticket. It was not that then.
No, not even close.
But games were still $40? I don't remember.
I think they were still fairly expensive. Like, I vaguely remember someone went through and price adjusted the price of games like over the decades. And if anything, they're cheaper now than they were like way back in the day.
Oh man, I guess discs are easier to produce.
Yeah, and like there was a whole bunch of more challenges with the price then, and just a higher barrier of entry.
So around the mid-90s, 5th generation consoles, the Sega Saturn, PlayStation, and N64, also started offering true 3D graphics.
Ooh, fancy.
Then later by 95, there was PCs that had 3D accelerator cards. Mm-hmm. And while arcade systems such as the Sega Model 3 remained considerably more advanced than home systems in the late 90s, the technological advantage that the arcades had and their ability to customize and use the latest graphics and sound chips was starting to narrow against the convenience of home games.
Yep.
And that caused another decline in arcade games.
Yeah, I mean, even if it doesn't look as good, hey, it doesn't cost a quarter every match, and you can just invite a friend over and play all day.
And Sega's 6th generation console, the Dreamcast, produced 3D graphics comparable to their Naomi arcade system, which was like their best of the best from 99.
Oh.
So arcade games had declined in popularity so much by the late 90s that revenues dropped to $1.3 billion in 99.
Yeah, come crying when you go under $1 billion, maybe. I don't know. Goddamn.
And reached a low of $866 million in 2004. So they're crying now.
Yeah, I guess.
Except that crying. The gap in the release dates of arcade games versus the console ports really had home consoles in the front runner for that.
Oh, really?
By the early 2000s, networked gaming via computers and then consoles across the internet had also appeared, replacing the venue of head-to-head competition and social atmosphere provided solely by arcades. Mm-hmm. Like you're saying, you'd have a friend over, but now you can just have your friend at home and play online.
Yep.
So they also lost their status for having new games come out, because given the choice of playing a game at an arcade or 3 or 4 times, you'd play it at an arcade 3 or 4 times, probably for 25 cents or 50 cents a shot, or you could just rent it for about the same price as how much you'd spend at the arcade and then have it all weekend.
Oh yeah, rental places were definitely like one of the last shots to the big arcade business.
Oh yeah. So fighting games were the most attractive features for arcades since they had that face-to-face competition. Mm-hmm. That competition led players to practice more and then spend more money, but they could not support the arcade business with just that.
Yeah.
So to remain viable, arcades added other elements to complement video games, such as redemption games, merchandiser, and food service, like snacks and fast food.
Yeah.
So that's the fun centers or family fun centers like Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah, the places where you can get like pizza and also video games.
Yeah. They brought up Gatti's Pizza a few times, so I actually Googled it, and yeah, huge chain, just we don't get it.
Oh, okay then.
In Canada. So many of the 1980s era arcades were closed, long closed, and classic coin-op games have largely become a province of dedicated gamers and hobbyists. In 2010s, what is how do you say that?
The 2010s, I guess.
Yeah, I never had to say that before. Movie theaters and family fun centers generally had small arcades still, so I know I play the arcade at the movie theater. Yeah. Even though it's garbage.
It's not terrible.
Yeah, Deal or No Deal is kind of fun. So in the 2000s and 10s, that's weird to say, arcades have found their niche market by providing games that use special controllers that are inaccessible at home, like dance games that use the floor pad. Even though you could get a floor pad, it wasn't the same as a hard mat, a hard stage, I guess. Stage is a good word for it.
Yeah, and the home ones would always start breaking when you fold them up or roll them up or put them away, and yeah.
So popular dance and rhythm games are Dance Dance Revolution and Drum Mania. And then there's rail shooters like Virtual Cop and Time Crisis House of the Dead, where you would get to shoot a whole bunch of things.
Those are always good.
So arcades survived mostly by expanding into ticket-based prize redemption, different types of physical games like Virtual Cop and Time Crisis that had no real equivalent. And then they also have like Skee Ball and Whack-A-Mole, which are, I'd say, electro-mechanical games.
Yes, I'd say so.
Yeah, look at arcades having to go all the way back to the 60s. Worldwide arcade game revenues gradually increased from 1.8 billion in 98 to 3.2 in 2004, and which was rivaling PC games at the time, which were 3.2 billion that same year.
Jesus.
Yeah, back when PC and arcade sold the same.
Yeah.
Arcade games were thriving in China. They were widespread across the whole country at that time. And that's when the US market saw its slight resurgence. Arcades across the nation went from 2,500 in 2003 to 3,500 in 2008. But that's very little compared to the 10,000 they had in the 80s in the States.
Yeah.
And then as of 2009, a successful arcade game usually sells between 4,000 and 6,000 units worldwide, which is... Yeah, it seems like very little.
Well, I guess because they can sit there forever as long as they're repaired. So
the relative simplicity but awesome gameplay of these early games inspired a new generation of fans who can play them on their phones with emulators. And one of the most popular emulators is MAME, M-A-M-E.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if they call it MAME or MAME.
I don't know. Never heard it out loud.
Yeah, probably for good reason. I'm sorry, listener. Some classic arcade games are reappearing in commercial settings, like Namco's Miss Pac-Man 20-year reunion with Galaga Class of 1981. It's a 2-in-1 cabinet, so it has the hardware and joysticks for everyone, and These new types of cabinets have flash drives for storing ROMs. So you can sort of swap them out. But classic games like Pac-Man have been selling an estimated 30 million downloads on the US since 2010.
Oh, jeez.
Not up to 2010, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, these arcade machines are also selling multi-game arcade machines to home users because someone can buy a cabinet and have all the nostalgia in one box.
Oh, yeah, the good old Neo Geo.
They even sold one they had a really weird one at Costco.
Like an arcade machine?
Yeah, and it had like 80 games on it.
Weird.
So, as you were saying a little earlier, the Japanese gaming industry, arcades have remained popular throughout to the present day.
Oh, yeah.
As of 2009, out of Japan's $20 billion gaming market, $6 billion of that is from arcades.
Wouldn't doubt it.
And it's the largest sector of gaming. Home consoles and mobile games make 3.5 and 2 billion, respectively.
Oh, yeah, because, like, why even bother owning games when you can just, like, you can play fully online, saving your character in the cloud games at Japanese arcades.
Yeah.
You get a card, it's linked to your save file, you load up this Gundam Assault or whatever, it's got your character, it's got your campaign, you're playing online with friends.
Pretty jealous
crazy.
of those kick-ass games.
Yeah.
And in 2005, arcade ownership and operation was the majority of Namco's revenue. Considerable withdrawal from the arcade market from other companies like Capcom and Sega made it the strongest player in the arcade market with 60% market share in 2006.
Oh, geez.
And despite global decline of arcades, Japanese companies hit record revenue for 3 consecutive years during this period.
Wow.
But due to the economic recession in Japan, arcades have been declining from... I'm just going to give the US amounts.
Okay.
Because yen is sort of hard to wrap our brains around.
I just dropped 2 zeros.
All right. From 70. Oh, damn it.
Just say it in American dollars.
8.7 billion in 2007. 6.2 billion in 2010, and then 2013 an estimated 4.2 billion. So it's pretty steady.
Yeah, no kidding.
470 billion yen is that 4.2. So in the Japanese market, network and card features introduced by Virtua Fighter 4 and World Cup Champion Football, and other novelty cabinets such as Gundam Pod have caused revitalizations in the arcade profitability in Japan. And yeah, like you're saying, they're just so cool, and they are online now, so you are playing with friends, and you're in a Gundam cockpit piloting a Gundam.
It's pretty cool.
Compared to the West, arcades are more like casinos.
They're more like poorly maintained casinos.
Yeah, and I think that's why people don't like them. Arcades are fun, because in Japan, the formal rivals of the industry, Konami, Taito, Bandai Namco, and Sega, are working together to keep the arcade industry vibrant. They have arcade networks, and venues have games from all major companies. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
the big
it's
boys
really
playing
freaking
together.
cool. And I mean, that's almost a peek into culture differences too, because like you can see like America's all about like, oh, capitalism, do it yourself, screw the little guy kind of thing, and Japan is a lot more like bring up the entire culture. You have respect for your school, respect for your company, respect for your family. It's I don't want to be too generalizing, but it's kind of the big culture difference. Like America is like you move out of your family home and break out on your own. Japanese culture is multiple generations living in the same home, all working together. One's not necessarily better than the other, but it's an interesting contrast.
Contrast, definitely. So when it comes to the technology behind these arcade games, virtually all modern arcade games make extensive use of solid-state electronics, integrated circuits, and cathode ray tube screens. At least they did.
Yeah, probably CRT screens have lost momentum since like LED came out and is cheap.
Oh yeah, and light.
Yeah.
So in the past, coin-op games generally used custom per-game hardware with multiple CPUs, highly specialized sound and graphics chips, and the latest expensive computer graphics display technologies. System boards were able to produce more complex graphics than it was possible on consoles, but was no longer the case since about 2010.
Yeah, wouldn't doubt it.
And now, since 2010, most arcade cabinets are modified console hardware or high-end PC components.
Yeah, because that's what the developers are developing on. So they just
Yeah.
throw a developer computer into the tower and ship it.
But it's arcade games that frequently have more immersive and realistic game controls than a PC or console game, because they have the specialized ambience and control accessories.
Yeah.
They sometimes have fully enclosed dynamic cabinets, which force feedback, dedicated light guns, rear projection displays, and reproductions of automobile and airplane cockpits, motorcycle or horse-shaped controllers, and highly dedicated controllers like dancing mats and fishing rods. There's
Yeah.
everything.
At one point in Japan, I played a Star Wars dogfighting game where you get into a TIE fighter ball pod, and there are displays all like 180 degrees in front of you.
Oh my god.
It's really good.
I need it. It's like it's making sound you don't need to, and you're just like, shut up.
Well, it's like you can actually like it's almost like a step up from VR, having the displays on all sides of you and looking around.
Because you're actually gripping onto the wheel or the joystick or whatever.
Yeah, you're holding on to the joystick. You've got the force feedback. It's more physical than VR with still the immersive display. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, every time you got hit, that whole pod probably shook, right?
No, just the controls in the seat.
Oh yeah, the seat. That makes sense. That's a lot cheaper, having not everything vibrate.
And it makes more sense too, come to think of it, because like if you get shot, the world doesn't shake, which would happen if the screens shook.
Oh. So, arcade games generally have short levels, simple intuitive control schemes, and then rapidly increasing difficulty.
Oh yeah.
So, sort of due to the environment of the arcade, where everyone's waiting to rent their time for the game. So, to play longer, you have to either be good or pay more.
Or both.
Usually both.
Yeah.
Some games on console or PC can be referred to as arcade games because they have similar qualities or are direct ports of arcade games. Many independent developers are producing games in the arcade genre that are specifically for use on the internet, like Flash games in web browsers.
Oh yeah.
And arcade racing games have simplified physics engines that don't require much learning compared to racing simulators, so you can just turn without braking or whatever, just because racing sims are sometimes too much.
Oh yeah, like you scrape the edge and all of a sudden you can't turn because your fender got caught in your tire.
Oh wow, yeah. And then AI in these games are usually programmed with simple rubber band logic,
Yeah.
where they're always close to you, giving you that pressure.
Well, because it's not fun to have them lap you.
Oh yeah.
It's more intense if they're always close but still beating you.
Yeah. All these notes I got from Wikipedia. You can see the exact notes I used if you're a Patreon supporter.
Nice.
And so, Alan, any thoughts about arcade games? I kind of want to go to an arcade after doing this.
Yeah, I wish Edmonton had a good arcade.
There's the less good one called the Rec Room.
Isn't that the one in the mall?
It's on the south side. It's a whole building.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of that one.
I guess I'll look up the proper name and send it to you.
Maybe check that out. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so that's a brief arcade game history. I could probably get more in depth or technical, and I would just be more lost than I already was.
Yeah, we don't simplify for your sake, listeners. It's Josh.
There's probably stuff I missed, and probably stuff you want to say about it. So just wherever you are, leave a comment. You can just email us, ps2jshow@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just search Press Start to join, and if you see faces, that's us. If not, PS2J Show, all one word.
Yep.
We'll find us everywhere.
We've also got ps2jshow.com, which is one of the best places to keep up to date with all our podcasts. And we've got a nice little comment system on there for each episode, if you want to drop us a line.
Oh, yeah.
So a big thank you to Josh for putting all this together every month, because it is super interesting, and I learned a bunch, and I'm sure you all did too. A huge thank you to the listener, you guys, for listening, and
I don't know what to say. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you for pressing start.
woo,
Is that it?
yeah.
We did it. Champagne! Yeah!
I want some champagne.
Uh-oh.
You do this over Skype, you son of a bitch. I want champagne now.
Uh-oh. Tune in next time.